Hey everyone, it's Alex and welcome to Altered Academy. In this video, we're going to be doing a complete beginner-friendly breakdown of the cards and synergies available in the ORDIS faction. We're going to be giving you an idea of essentially, what kind of cards work together, the types of tribes that exist within this faction, and the way the cards can kind of functionally synergize together to give you an edge in Altered TCG. Let's get started. As with all things, we start with the heroes. We have three heroes, Waru and Mac, Sigismar and Wingspan, and Gulrang and Tocsin. Now, each of these provide very distinct advantages and disadvantages in the way they play. Waru and Mac is going to be with the Bureaucrats. We're going to be speaking about them more in depth momentarily, but basically it is a synergy that helps to disrupt your opponent's play pattern and using the asleep mechanic to not only generate a token, but also to keep bureaucrats that are, affecting your opponents negatively on the board for extended periods of time. You have Sigismar and Wingspan. This is going to be a very zoo-centric approach to playing Altered TCG. And then Gulrang and Tocsin, which is like this slow-moving turtle-type approach where you can't even progress your expeditions until round 5 when you have 8 mana orbs, despite the fact that you have a lot of these incredibly boosted tokens that are preventing your opponent from taking over. And if they don't take you out within those 8 turns, then you generally have a really big advantage. We have a lot of things to talk about here, and we start with the ORDIS recruit, who is genuinely instrumental to the success of the ORDIS faction as a whole. I know in other games tokens can occasionally be throwaways, but in Altered TCG, in particular with the ORDIS faction, these recruits will most certainly be a deciding factor in your games. They push power early on with the expeditions, they close out expeditions late in the game as well, they synergize with the heroes. This is a core component to the way you play Altered TCG. And in this slide here, we're talking about direct generation. So the common ORDIS cadets will produce one in the expedition that the cadets are played in, both from reserve and from the hand. The rare gets the upgrade of kind of diversifying your attack by putting one of the ORDIS recruits into the other location. So you have the ORDIS cadets in one, the ORDIS recruit in the other, and of course the one that starts with Sigismar and Wingspan if you so decide to go that hero. So your early game is already this zoo style pattern. Not to mention you do get the additional water energy. You also have the gatekeeper, who is very interesting in the sense that the gatekeeper does have a bit of a unbalanced kind of stats towards the mountain, adding a single recruit to the opposite expedition from both the hand and from the reserve. But the gatekeeper rare will add one to each, which is very, very strong. You have the out of faction rare for Radisker, who will create 2 ORDIS recruits in an expedition. So in and of itself represents 3 power, but remember we have cards like Charge and stuff where having individual tokens can represent a significant threat against your opponent. The Haven Trainee, so these are 2 Bravos based cards, and they don't do boosts in here. They create the recruits, right? That's pretty interesting. You have these out of faction rares coming in, and they completely change the way that they produce their value to better benefit the general game plan of ORDIS by creating a soldier token in each of your expeditions as the Haven Trainee. And then of course you have the ORDIS carrier. Okay, the common ORDIS carrier will produce 1 token, and the rare will produce 2 tokens, although it's more expensive. As you can see, we have a lot of token generation here in the ORDIS faction, and we also have indirect generation for the tokens as well. So these are cards that don't necessarily play them or generate tokens from hand or from reserve, but have alternate abilities, like for instance the Paper Herald, which can be discarded to generate a recruit. Similarly, you also have the Monolith Legate, who can be discarded to create a recruit in a target expedition. You also have the ORDIS Spy, which when played from the reserve will generate a token, and of course this is unique to the rare version. The standard and the rare version both sabotage, but only the rare version will produce a recruit from the reserve. And then you have Jeanne d'Arc. Jeanne d'Arc's unique because the standard version, of course, creates 2 recruits, 1 in each expedition. The rare will produce 2 for each expeditions, and can be a remarkable kind of, it's a bit of a slower play. Like you generally play Jeanne d'Arc and you're a bit weaker because that you're getting 2 power across the board for 5 energy. That's not generally enough. And so as a result, that next turn is where you put the jets on, where you apply the pressure, you use your charges and close out both expeditions. Then we have Thoth, of course, which, if your expedition fails to advance, this is a bureaucrat, you will generate 2 ORDIS tokens. So very interesting approach here, and with Waru and Mac, that could be a third token as well, because obviously it generates a token if a bureaucrat remains at noon. So that's indirect token generation. Then we have token-based effects. These are cards that will benefit from the existence of tokens. And so, for instance, Kokoba, both the standard and the rare, will get boosts depending on if you meet the condition of having 3 or more characters. Characters can be anything like the Ozma here, Athena, or anything else, but also the recruits are character tokens. So they actually count as characters and therefore will trigger Kokoba. It'll also trigger Ozma, which allows you to draw a card, always beneficial in the card game. Athena, right? If you control 2 or more other characters, gain 2 boosts. And if you control 2 or more other characters, lose fleeting. Okay, the more tokens you have on the board, the more characters you have on the board, and therefore benefiting these potentially extremely powerful cards. Then you have Atlas. Atlas gives your tokens gigantic, which means that their effect and their stats are spread across all the different, both expeditions available in the game. So like that is kind of crazy, especially when you consider the effect of Charge or Gulrang Tocsin, the way they boost the tokens pretty significantly. So Monolith Runescribe as well. Okay, if you have a token in play, you resupply. Okay, the monolith here will actually boost your tokens as they come in. They'll boost characters in general, but specifically your tokens will get boosted when they come into play, which is incredibly powerful. Every token you generate is suddenly not a 1/1, but a 2/2. That is very difficult for your opponent to deal with. Then we have the token and character spells. Again, we reference Charge here. You have the standard one as a 2/2. It has fleeting though, so you use it once and it's gone. The rare is a 2/3 that kind of goes to the reserve, so you get to play it again. You have Open the Gates, which generates 2 ORDIS soldiers in each of the expeditions, so 4 total, but 2 in each. And then you have the Open the Gates rare, which allows you to determine where the recruits go. However, it is also cheaper by 1 from reserve. Teamwork Training is a very fascinating spell with regards to character and tokens. Essentially, send to reserve target character with hand cost X or less, where X is the number of characters you control. The more tokens you have, the more characters you have, the more effective this spell becomes at its disruption. And then, of course, you have the rare, which will actually create an ORDIS recruit as well into the target expedition, and which obviously amplifies the ability of the spell itself. So a lot of really interesting things all around tokens with this deck. So I don't want you to sleep on the importance of these tokens. They're absolutely vital to the success of the ORDIS faction. Now we have permanents. Permanents are also very important to ORDIS. There's a couple factions that really benefit from permanents. Of course, Axiom is very similar to this as well. Permanents are an important part of the ORDIS strategy here. You have a couple out of faction cards here which really benefit the use of permanents, specifically the Foundry Mechanic and the Foundry Engineer. They are out of faction rares, but they really do increase the opportunity for you to like not just take massive L's early in the game where like you just on turn 1 you play an ORDIS carrier and eat two expedition losses, right? They help you to kind of maintain a presence in the early game and then utilize their abilities to then sneak out these permanents at opportune times. So in the case of the Foundry Mechanic, you can discard it from reserve to discount one of these permanents by 1. Conversely, the Foundry Engineer can be played from reserve, and it'll actually allow the next card that is a permanent to be 2 costed less, which is a lot. That's a significant discount and allows you to curve very effectively in your strategy while also using their stats to hopefully progress your own expeditions as well. When we talk about permanents, the ones that I think most people lean towards, of course, are the ORDIS Carrier and its rare version. Now, these just generate the straight up tokens. The ORDIS Carrier is a 3-costed permanent that'll create a ORDIS recruit in your companion expedition. The rare version will put 1 in each expedition, which is clearly valuable. The monolith is going to boost the characters by 1/1/1. The rare version is cheaper, but it's a non-character token that gets boosted. So in strategies where you're not fixating on the character tokens, the non-character tokens, sorry, you're going to want to use the rare version to save that energy or the mana. And when you want to use as many tokens as you can with like Sigismar and Wingspan, you're going to want to cater towards the common one. Then we have the Grand Endeavor. This is a much more complex strategy overall. overall, but the idea of forcing expeditions to move forward is very interesting, particularly at noon. This is more of a bureaucrat style strategy, but I mean, hey, maybe you'll find creative ways to use that grand endeavor as well. But regardless, permanents are a core component of ORDIS. Generally speaking, most newer players are going to focus on using both the carrier and the monolith. I would suggest probably aiming for like the common or the rare ORDIS carriers, and then you have the common or monolith here, which I think is generally easier to wield for like most newer players are usually playing like Sigmar Wingspan, where you're probably going to want the common. And then we go to permanent synergy. Now, these are synergies where, like, you have certain effects that you might want to activate again. And so the Assembly Engineer, which is an out-of-faction rare, has the ability to be discarded from the reserve and activate the out-of-hand triggers of the permanents you control. And this is both from reserve and from the hand, I should say, because that's what that symbol represents. So we have a couple that actually do that. Ironically, they're all out of faction. So, Baba's Isba here allows you to draw a card. You can use the Armor Jammer to sabotage. The Brass Bug Hub will generate counters, which is very helpful. And especially with like Gulrang and Tocsin, the Brass Bug Hub is very useful. And so having something like the Assembly Engineer could be a legitimate synergy. Obviously, it's not quite as... In Axiom, you'll have more use for these types of synergies, but hey, in future sets, you might see more for the Assembly Engineer to proc. Then we go to removal and disruption. Now, generally speaking, in terms of factions, removal and disruption is generally the forte of Ysmir. All different kind of factions have some form, right? Whether they put things to sleep or whatever, right? But in the case of ORDIS, we have Sticky Note Seals, which is one of the most primary ones here. And Sticky Note Seals has a really interesting effect. It's 3-costed from both hand and from reserve, but do note that it does have fleeting on the common, does not have fleeting on the rare. Basically, the way it reads here is you get to choose one. Send a reserve target character with hand cost 4 or more. Okay, so that's to reserve, or you can discard a permanent of 4 or more. These can be particularly powerful plays. And so, at the end of the day, I do like what Sticky Note Seals does provide the ORDIS player. It gives you a little bit of like removal to help win a location when possible, which can definitely be very helpful. We talked about teamwork training as well. Teamwork training, very dependent on the number of characters you have on the board, generally with token-based strategies. Effective removal that is relatively inexpensive and scales effectively. Where Sticky Note Seals has some like limitations where you have to meet the conditions. Teamwork training, provided you have a wide board, those conditions are much softer. But then again, you're punished if you do not have an effective board. And then we have Kelon Burst. Now, Kelon Burst is an out-of-faction rare, and it kind of fills the gaps of Sticky Note Seals to an extent, where Sticky Note Seals is hand cost 4 or more on both effects. The Kelon Burst is send a reserve target character with hand cost 4 or less. Discard target permanent with 4 or less. So they are complete opposites to one another, which is helpful, but bear in mind that the Sticky Note Seal here is a common, and this is going to be an out-of-faction rare. You only get 15 rares, so that's why, you got to pick and choose your rares with effectiveness. We have Celestial Blast here, which is an out-of-faction rare as well. Discard up to 2 targets, characters, or permanents, and draw a card. Incredibly expensive, right, at 7 mana here, but the draw card effect plus the removal is incredible. Not only that, doesn't go to reserve, they are straight up discarded. Banishing Gate, classic spell for Ysmir, does make its way into ORDIS as an out-of-faction rare. It has fleeting, and it discards a target character or permanent without a condition. Then you have the Sandman. I'm including the Sandman here because, yes, it is an out-of-faction rare. Its stats are a little weak, but you know what? You allow yourself to put a character to sleep, and you can choose as to whether or not it gets boost. That means that you can put your own Bureaucrat to sleep if you so choose, give it a boost, or you can put a target opponent to sleep to negate their stats and win that expedition, right? And not boost them for that next turn. So this is the removal and disruption available to ORDIS. Generally speaking, pretty effective and a lot of different options, although not the top and not necessarily the strength of this faction as a whole. When talking about strengths, the Bureaucrats is definitely one of the most powerful tribes available, not only in this particular faction, but potentially in the game. It's incredible what these are capable of doing, and we're going to go through all of them here, and of course we're going to be speaking about Waru as well. But right off the top here, we have a couple out of factions that are really beneficial here. You have the Verdant back. incredibly well statted for 4/4, you know, at 5/5/6. It has Defender unless you control 2 or more Bureaucrats. So if you have Bureaucrats on the board, suddenly this 4/4 monster allows you to progress your expeditions, which can be pretty impressive. You also have a permanent landmark here, which is an out of faction rare that allows you to basically exhaust it, and the next Bureaucrat you play costs 1 less. That's a discount. I'll accept that. I will happily take that. And that's helpful, especially with some of the other ones that like to sneak in very early in not only the game, but in earlier turns, right? Or like basically in the turn order, like something like a Robin Hood. You want to get it out right away. In terms of the actual Bureaucrats here, you do have the Frog Prince. Anybody that's been playing the starter decks is going to be very familiar with the Frog Prince. Nothing fancy here, just kind of gets a little bit of a better curve. I don't even know if it's better. It is a better curve slightly for the rare here. You have the Monolith Legate, which gets the addition of generating the ORDIS token. And of course, an additional stat here. So discards it from reserve to generate the token for the same cost. You have the Monolith Archivist. Good stats, 2/3/3s across the board, has Defender. And then the rare has Defender unless you control 2 or more Bureaucrats. So if you play it later in the game and you have a lot of Bureaucrats, suddenly you're able to actually progress your locations, and bear in mind that it is a Bureaucrat in and of itself, but it is 2 or more other Bureaucrats. So, you know, you have to have a bit of a wider board there. Now, we would be remiss not to mention Waru and Mac here, who is the ORDIS hero that specifically deals with the Bureaucrats. We'll reread it here just to make sure that we're all clear. At noon, if you control 1 or more Bureaucrats, create an ORDIS recruit in a target expedition of your choice. When you play a Bureaucrat, you may have it gain a sleep. So essentially, you can play something like Robin Hood, right? So let's say this: you have the Bountiful Meadow here. You exhaust it. Suddenly, this Robin Hood costs 3. You play it out. You put it to sleep, but that effect still remains. So you're not utilizing the stats, but the effect of your opponent's characters cost 1 more remains in effect for two entire turns, because he sits there, he's asleep, and then he wakes up the next turn and then goes to reserve after that one. And that's where Waru and Mac is so effective. You can add this incredible disruption and kind of just like, okay, am I playing Robin Hood for the stats? Probably not. I'm playing Robin Hood because he is a pain for your opponent to deal with. Let's have him sit there for another turn. It's like a form of anchoring, but without the statistics help, right? So very interesting approach there. And so with this common Robin Hood, your characters that they play cost 1 more. And with the rare, it's cards that your opponents play cost 1 more. Then you have the Council 4/4 for 4s. The activated abilities, essentially, if characters facing them cannot activate, which is pretty solid. And then you have a better curved Council with similar stats. I mean, it's 4/4 for 4 and 3 for 3/3. It's so hard to say. But what I will tell you is that, remember, a lot of the synergies that this deck will operate on are having multiple Bureaucrats present. And so having cheaper ones can definitely be beneficial to have more on a given board to potentially progress the game. I don't even know how to say this one. I'm not going to give it a shot. But this dragon looking dude here, essentially when your opponent draws 1 or more cards or does a resupply, create a token in a target expedition. Another great option to put to sleep, right? Because that effect remains in play while they're sleeping. They draw a card at the, whatever, and boom, you get yourself a token, right? And then you have the ORDIS Attorney. Again, there's lots of Bureaucrats here. The ORDIS Attorney, when my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, draw a card. Again, decently statted, and you get a better curve on the rare. You're going to notice a bit of a commonplace thing with the rares being better curved. Okay, and this one here, whose name I'm not going to attempt to say, a 6/6 for 4/4/4. Your other expedition and the expedition facing it can't move forward. So you just kind of negate an entire expedition's progress, which is kind of crazy because you can just throw it while trying to progress the other one of your choosing. We have Thoth as well, another Bureaucrat. When my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, create a ORDIS recruit in a target expedition. And again, they get better statted, except Thoth, does get an additional recruit with the additional rarity, which does help quite a bit. And then we have Gulrang Tocsin. Now, Gulrang Tocsin is a very different approach to playing Altered TCG with the ORDIS faction, whereas the Waru and Mac is all about abusing the you know, the Bureaucrats, Sigismar, and Wingspan is about going super wide with as many tokens as you can and using charge and etc. to kind of overwhelm your opponent. Gulrang Tocsin is like this controlled turtle style deck where like you basically just fall back defensively, try to get to turn 5 without dying, and then just crush your opponent for turn after turn after turn, right? And we do this with a number of different things, okay? First of all the tokens that get generated are going to get boosted. So the cards that generate tokens like we talked about before, like the ORDIS Gatekeeper and the Cadets, those are really valuable for kind of keeping your game plan steady in the early game and then just pushing out incredible power later on. It's also worth noting that it's talking about tokens here. So the Brass Bug Hub is going to create tokens, but they're going to be brass bugs. They're not going to be your recruits, and they're going to be 3/3/3s because of the ability of the tokens getting boosted, which is great. Because then you play this, you play this, you play the assembly engineer, you refresh it, right? And all of a sudden you got this engine of these 3/3/3s that your opponent can't really deal with, right? And then you got open the gates, right? You can, you know, these will be 2/2/2s across the board. You put them down wherever you want, or you just use the regular one, which is 2 on each side. You charge them, and suddenly, like, what's your opponent do? It's insane amount of power, right? The ORDIS Gatekeeper, phenomenal with Gulrang Tocsin because of the fact that you're balancing your approach, right, and your attack. And in each of your expeditions, as this rare, those are coming out as 2/2s, right? So that's 4 stats just there, and then you get the 5 stats, so it's basically 3 5s. It's crazy, right? Very well statted. Jeanne d'Arc for the same reason. Those those two soldiers, those tokens, are going to come out boosted from Tocsin and Gulrang. And of course, the ORDIS Carrier. Listen, do I have to repeat myself? More tokens, more power, more capabilities. And then when we talk about sacrifice, this is a bit of a different synergy that's available in ORDIS. And, you know, it's not as like well-rounded as some of the other ones, but it's there and it's still something that can be particularly disruptive. But perhaps in future sets, we'll see additional kind of build rounds for this. Not to say it's bad. It's just not quite as well developed as like the Bureaucrats is or the zoo mechanics are, but still very interesting. It's worth noting that Sigismar and Wingspan could be ideal for this type of strategy to some degree because you're generating a token that can then be sacrificed, right? So when you play something like an Anubis, who's decently statted, a 4/4 for 3/3/3 at the rare, but your opponent's like, well, I gotta sacrifice something? Like, that sucks. I played a Shenlong. I guess he's dead, right? Like, what do you do? And you're just like, well, I kill a token, I guess, right? So those types of things are very fascinating. You have Baba Zizba, which again, you could sacrifice a character and play after you. You get that Ysmir effect, and again, the ORDIS recruits are token characters. You have the Gift of Self, a 2/2 here, and you sacrifice a character. If you do, draw 2 cards, okay? Sacrifice a token, a 1/1/1, draw 2 cards. It's not too bad, right? You have Kuat the Dissenter here, sacrifice a character in my expedition. He's doing this because obviously he's well statted, right? He's well statted, so he doesn't go to a little sacrifice there. That's pretty good. And then we got the Kraken. Sacrifice 2 characters, and it's a 7 and then 8 in the water. All regions are water and lose their other types. Okay. Very disruptive, very interesting play. So, and it's also gigantic, of course, which means it's present in both locations. But really interesting synergy here, good splashes, and again, with the tokens, token kind of synergy you have with ORDIS as a whole, those sacrifices won't punish you as much as they punish your opponent. It's a disproportionate style of effect. And that takes us to the end of the video here. I hope you found it helpful. Please leave feedback. Let me know what you thought. I do plan on doing this for all the other factions as well. So let me know what you think and what you'd like to see next. We got another video for you on the screen there, and we'll see you on that next one.